Hi everyone, I'm Anya Parampil and you're watching Red Lines. Since 2011, mainstream corporate media has inundated the public with stories about the war in Syria, designed to garner support for the US, Saudi, Israeli, Turkish, and other foreign-backed efforts for regime change in Damascus. But nearly 10 years since the start of the war on Syria, the military conflict may finally be drawing to a close. The Syrian military is currently fighting to retake the last section of its territory, which remains controlled by foreign-backed extremist fighters, Idlib province, which is located in the country's north. Idlib is primarily controlled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was once known as al-Nusra Front in Syria. It is al-Qaeda's affiliate in the country and the largest offshoot of al-Qaeda to exist since the U.S. launched its so-called War on Terror in 2001. And it exists thanks to U.S. support. When Saudi journalist Janan Musa secretly smuggled video out of Idlib in 2017, she uncovered an extremely conservative, repressive, and downright frightening reality faced by Syrians living under al-Nusra's control.
صورنا حصرا جهاديي تنظيم القاعدة الصينيين ومن دول آسيا الوسطى المنتشرين في المحافظة. وهذه صور خاصة من إحدى المعارك لكتيبة الأوزبك المتمركزة في مدينة إدلب والتي تقاتل جنبا إلى جنب مع النصرة. في أماكن كثيرة في إدلب الشعارات المتطرفة تغطي الجدران. في أماكن أخرى يرفرف علم تنظيم القاعدة.
As the Syrian government inches closer to retaking Idlib, Western corporate media has launched a last-ditch effort to propagandize the public into supporting further foreign intervention in Syria. Listen to CNN reporter Arwa Damon cite a UN official who claimed that 1 million children will be left dead by the time the offensive is complete.
It's tragic, Allison. To put it in the words of the UN's emergency coordinator, he said that if the situation stays like this, we are going to be looking potentially at the world's largest pile of rubble strewn with the bodies of 1 million children. Just how bad does it need to get for the world to take action?
CNN and other media outlets constantly obscure the root cause of the war in Syria. But to get a different perspective, I spoke with Syrian journalist Bashar Barazi. He's a correspondent for Hispan TV in Damascus and a friend of mine who I met in Venezuela who actually showed me around Syria when I had the privilege of visiting the country last year. I wanted to start by sharing some headlines we've been reading in corporate or Western media outlets that have been promoting regime change in Syria about the situation in Idlib. The New York Times released a headline saying, quote, "It's like the end of the world." Sky News, meanwhile, says Idlib, the Syrian province where war crimes are being committed and the world is doing nothing to help. And finally, Al Jazeera, a doctor in Idlib, it cannot get more evil than this. Meanwhile, CNN reporter Arwa Damon recently cited a UN official who claimed 1 million kids will die as a result of the Idlib offensive. Do these headlines reflect reality?
Hi, Anya, how are you? Well, to tell you the truth, I think that the Western American and sub-Arab country media has a negative role in Syria since the first day of the crisis here. They always try to repel and to assist and to give all kinds of support to the terrorist armed group since the first day of the crisis. They present them as a moderated group, as revolutionary people who are getting against the regime. So I think that all the kind of falsifications we are seeing now and we are watching now in the crisis in Syria has an objective to support the armed group, not for them, but to get some interest, like the national media has always taken in this crisis in Syria. I think that it's a negative paper, a negative role in Syria They always, with the victories of the Syrian army and their allies, they always cry the humanitarian cries. They always talk about the chemical weapons also. So I don't think that the Syrian people and the Syrian citizens trust what they are talking about, the humanitarian cries. It's very important to mention that the majority of so-called civilians, there are families of armed groups who came from different countries, from different, also from different provinces in Syria, from different cities, after refusing any kind of settlement of the Syrian government. The civils of the original civils of civilians of Idlib has abandoned this country for a long time because of the practice of the terrorist armed group there. They were forced to leave their countries, to leave their localities, to leave their municipality because of the pressure of the armed group. So the majority of the so-called civilian there are families of armed group, and there's a specific kind of percentage of civilians, but all the numbers they are mentioned as 1 million kids, 1 million civilians, they are not correct. The number of the civilians in Idlib are much more less than that, but there is no official statistic about that.
Idlib is, of course, the province where throughout the entire war, as the Syrian army won back territory, they would actually bus these armed groups, as you mentioned, on green buses from other cities to Idlib. It was kind of where they were just dumping them throughout the war, and now it's the last territory more or less controlled by these groups. I notice in mainstream Western media that they often to explain why the war is happening. The situation is presented as though the Syrian government, led by Assad, is committing genocide or simply killing its people for fun. What are the root causes of the current humanitarian crisis and violence in Idlib?
Well, to tell you the truth, they always do the same with all government. They are not go along with their policy, with their instruction. I think the main cause of the humanitarian situation or crisis in Syria is the sanctions imposed by the United States, Europe, and some Arab countries against the Syrian people. The sanctions are a very hard measures that imposed against the Syrian people, not the Syrian government. And this is the main purpose of the crisis we are facing now in Syria.
Many pro-regime change activists and reporters in Western media claim, quote, the world is standing by and doing nothing in Idlib and in Syria overall. Is it accurate to say that foreign countries have simply stood by and watched the war in Syria take place, or did foreign actors actually play a role in the conflict?
Well, on the contrary, I think that they are doing all they can to make problems in Syria and to change the regime in Syria, regardless of the humanitarian situation or the humanitarian crisis the Syrians are facing. Because, as I told you, the sanctions, I think they don't care about the suffering of the Syrian people in every city, in every place, in every home in Syria. They just want to achieve their own purpose in Syria by changing this government that are not going along with their instruction, that refuse any kind of instruction. It's a sovereign government selected or by all Syrians. So I think that it is not accurate for Europe, for the United States, and for some Arab countries having this sovereign government in Syria led by President al-Assad.
And Turkey, for example, which shares a border with Idlib province, is a foreign power which played a major role in enabling these foreign fighters and US-backed, Saudi-backed various groups dominate the country, correct?
Yes, of course. Turkey, from the first day of the crisis, has taken a very, very, very negative role in this crisis. This country has or became entrance for all kinds of terrorists. They came from more than 85 countries, and they gave them all kinds of support, armed, logistic information, and of course the media support by the Turkish media. President Erdogan has expansionist dreams in Syria, has specific plans in Syria against the Syrian government, and he wants to reveal the Ottoman dream in this country and other country. We are watching now what he's doing in Libya also. So I don't think that Turkey has a positive role in Syria. On the contrary, I think they are a big part of the problem we are living here in Syria. The Syrians are against the policy of Turkey in all its aspects because they remember very well that it's a part of the Ottoman Sultanate, which is the dream of Erdogan to revive this dream of this Sultanate. So I don't think that Turkey has a positive role in Syria, all the country.
That's not even to mention the goals of Israel, another neighbor which has attacked Syria continuously throughout this war, even is bombing Syria this week, correct?
Yes, air attack. It's an air attack by Israel. At the same time of the Turkish aggression against Syria, many analysts here in Syria consider that it's a part of coordination between Turkey and Israeli regime and some other countries, some other Arab countries, because they are the same actors, they are the same countries that conspire against Syria. As we were watching, the Syrian army is achieving a very important victories in Idlib, and this affects the morale of the armed group in all Syrian territory. Therefore, we have seen this kind of coordination between Turkey and Israel by attacking at the same time the Syrian territory in Idlib in the northwest and also in Damascus and the suburbs of Damascus. This is a big problem for the Syrian because it's a kind of aggression that, as I told you, hasn't stopped from the first days of the crisis here in Syria. The Israeli regime has attacked several times infrastructure in Syria, all kinds of economic place, and also a residential street, as we say in the last December, when Israeli attack caused a lot of victims in Syrian or in the suburbs of Damascus, in the Jdeidi zone close to the capital Damascus.
We're talking about at least hundreds of times that Israel has bombed Syria since the start of this war. What stage does the Idlib offensive represent in the Syria conflict?
Well, I think that we are in the last phase of the crisis in Syria. Today, the Syrian army with its allies are achieving a big and huge victory in Idlib and also in the western part of Aleppo. We have seen that the Syrian army has recovered the most important highway in Syria, which is Damascus Aleppo, known as M5, and we are watching now the big victory or bigger victories that the Syrian army is achieving in the Sur, in the south. The last hour we have seen victories in recovering so many places in the Sur and south and southwest of Idlib. This is the last stage and the last phase of the battle of the Syrian army. We call here this is the biggest battle where the Syrian army is achieving a lot of victories with the Russian also against the terrorist armed group supported by Turkey and other countries in this kind or in this part of Syria.
While the military conflict in Syria is hopefully going to be over soon, as you described, while I was in the country last fall, I noticed the economic war against the country was intensifying and could be felt in the form of high levels of inflation, for example. What is the current economic picture in Syria, and how has the U.S. targeted Syria financially?
Well, we cannot ignore that the economic situation in Syria is critical. The sanctions, as I told you at the beginning, the sanctions imposed by the United States, Europe, and some Arab countries has affected negatively the everyday life of the Syrian citizens, especially the last law by the American government, the Caesar law, the new sanctions, the new measures imposed by Syrian against the Syrian citizen, first of all, and also against the reconstruction process has affected negatively the economic life in Syria, and we are facing difficulties to getting many imported products. This is affected the Syrian citizen, not the government, and we all know that it is an arm against the people, not the government. We have seen the experience of Cuba that the last 60 years. This will not change the government. This will just provoke a suffering for the people, for the citizen. So it is against the humanitarian situation if the United States and Europe knows about this situation in Syria, because this is a big problem for the Syrian citizen and for the infrastructure of Syria, and this is affected negatively all aspects of life here in Syria.
It's very similar to the situation in Venezuela, a country where I've spent a lot of time reporting. I know you have visited as well because we actually met in Caracas, but where you can go into a market and you can find things that you need, but the price is so high that a lot of people can't afford basic goods. This is part of a common economic war we see against targets of U.S. empire. Bashar, we rarely hear from Syrians in Western corporate media unless they support regime change. And those of us who put the actions of the Syrian military or the Syrian government into context are accused of, quote, ignoring the voices of Syrians. You are Syrian. You and everyone that you know have been deeply affected by the war. You're a reporter who spent time covering the war all throughout the country. What can you tell us about how the war has impacted you personally, and what message do you have for people in the U.S. and its allied states who support regime change and a war against the Syrian people?
Well, to tell you the truth, all Syrians here, all Syrian citizens is having a big problem to get all kinds of products or imported products, especially the oil products, because of the sanction imposed against all aspects of economic life in Syria.
And because the U.S. is occupying Syria's own oil.
Yes, especially the Western Zone, when all the oil, where the oil distribution and the biggest oil point in Syria, we have seen that the United States occupied the Western reserve, where the most important reserve of oil are distributing there in Syria. I think it's a big problem for the old Syrian citizens to get oil products and other imported products because of the sanction and because of the threats that the US and Europe are doing with all companies that want to come to the Syrian market, that want to help the Syrian market, to help the Syrian citizens to get their necessities. The basic necessities of the Syrian citizen are not available. They are not able to get their necessities, the daily necessities, because of the sanction. You cannot find the products. And if, as you told about Venezuela, if you get this product, it will be in a very high prices that the Syrian citizen cannot afford because of the sanction that affected the Syrian, also the Syrian Libra. Because of that, we have, after 9 years of war, this affected the Syrian Libra, which is the money here, the Syrian money, and we are having a problem to afford to get all kinds of our necessities because of the sanctions that the United States that because you have to change the regime, but it's affected just the Syrian citizens in all the country.
When I was there in September, I think the exchange rate was something of about one US dollar was equal to around 600 or 700 Syrian lira, depending on the day, because the rate would change so much drastically from one day to another. I'm curious, what is the rate now? Do you know?
Yes, of course. Today 1 US dollar is equal to 1,200 Syrian pounds.
Wow.
This is a very big problem. It has become a grave problem for all Syrians because this affected the capacity of the Syrians to get the products, and this is making a very big problem, a humanitarian problem for the Syrian citizen. If the United States and Europe are taking care about the situation or the humanitarian situation, they should stop all kinds of measures, all kinds of bilateral measures, all kinds of sanctions imposed by Syrians, because this will just affect the Syrian citizens. This will provoke more suffering for the Syrian citizen in all the countries, and this is paralyze the Syrian economy. Of course, they are trying to get by economic war what they hold to get by a political or by a military war during more than 8 years of the crisis.
One final question. I'm also just curious if the government has taken any initiatives to alleviate, to lessen some of the suffering by people during this economic crisis. What help or services do people still receive from the government, despite the fact it's been the target of an overthrow attempt, a violent war waged from the outside for over 8 years now?
Yes, of course, the Syrian government has taken a lot of measures in the last years, and since the beginning of the war against Syria, by cooperating with their allies as Iran, Russia, and some Arab countries who stand by the Syrian government as Algeria. We have seen during the several years of war here that the Syrian government had made a lot of effort to get, especially the oil product from Iran, from Russia, from other countries, and also to cover the necessity in the medical section also, because the sanction expanded to the medical section and to the all kind of economic aspect. So the Syrian government has taken a lot of measures to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people. And we all remember that there's still this day, and after 8 years of war, there's a lot of products that are subsidized by the Syrian government, as the bread, as the rice, and the oil, and other products that constitute the major or the basic necessities of the Syrian citizen in all the country and in all the province. The Syrian government is taking a lot of measures, but it's still not enough, because every year and every month, the American and the European are revising their sanctions and impose a new sanction to provoke more suffering for the Syrian citizen, and to trying to close the way that the Syrian government are trying to open to help their citizens to affront the sanctions and all the bilateral measures that impose against this country.
Well, Bashar, I hope that there are some people in the United States who oppose the sanctions and the war on your country, and it's our responsibility to resist that here in the U.S., to oppose these sanctions, these criminal sanctions against Syria, Venezuela, and so many other countries.
I think that there should be an effort for the community, for political parties in the United States, in Europe, and in all the world, to help the Syrian citizen and to help the Syrian country, the country here, to eliminate this sanction, to put an end to this problem that the Syrian people are suffering since 2012.
I agree with you, but I hope that soon there will be peace in Syria overall, all territories in Syria united and peaceful, and that there is some relief to the economic suffering as well. I look forward to returning to the country and visiting with you again, and this time we can take the Damascus-Aleppo highway, because we couldn't do it last time, but now I look forward to doing that in the future.
Hope to see you again here in Syria.
Thanks so much, Bashar.
Thank you.